Walking a path along the roots of Pikes Peak, you take a fork in the road to the Anselm Society Digital Pub. Inside is a raucous conversation on the arts, faith, and whether anyone knows what the term lividity means. In a corner, by the fire, are three people. One of them is a little surprised, but then not so surprised to realize that all three of them know exactly what lividity is. And that's me, Matthew Mellema, and welcome to Believe to See, a podcast of the Anselm Society Arts Guild. Here at Believe to See, we explore the relationship between art, faith, and storytelling. Our goal is to connect the great stories, and our own stories so that we can better understand what it means to live with a Christian imagination. And as I just said, we do talk a lot about stories on this podcast, and mostly we do that with the assumption that stories are a force for good. And when told for the right reasons, they obviously are. But the power of stories has another side, and that's its potential for misuse, a potential for danger. And this is especially the case when a story is being presented as the untold true story. In this episode, we're going to examine ways a story can be used for good and the ways it can be twisted into something bad. And all those different stories involve the same event, the 1999 murder of Hae-Min Lee. So the story rocketed to national attention in 2014 with the launch of Serial, that podcast by Sarah Koenig, which examined the circumstances surrounding the murder of Hae-Min Lee, who was a high school student at Woodlawn High School in Baltimore in 1999. To be more precise, Serial examined the criminal investigation and subsequent conviction of Adnan Syed, a fellow student at Woodlawn and Hae's ex-boyfriend. Serial, for any of you who were not living maybe on the moon, became a national sensation, making stars out of the host and bringing a new level of respectability to true crime podcasts. And, it's really easy to see why. Serial was carefully crafted and really compelling storytelling, and it left most listeners in a state of really intriguing doubt. Did Adnan Syed actually murder Hae-Min Lee? Or was he unjustly serving a life sentence for a crime he was innocent of? The truth, according to Serial, can never fully be known, so we should all start talking about it. But here's the thing. The actual truth wasn't really that complicated, and there's no reason for the person examining the facts to be racked with any kind of doubt. Adnan Syed is innocent, and the case brought against him was an unjust fabrication. And if you don't believe me, ask the state's attorney for Baltimore, Marilyn Mosby. Let's fast forward to the present day. On September 15th, Mosby's office, the same office who charged Adnan Syed in the first place, filed a motion asking the court to vacate Syed's conviction. They filed this because, after a year-long review of the case, they had severe doubts that Syed received a fair trial and strongly hinted that they now had other, more plausible suspects that they were investigating. On September 19th, the court granted the motion following a hearing. Adnan Syed is now a free man and looks to remain so permanently. For the millions of folks who listened to Serial but weren't following the ins and outs of Syed's subsequent legal proceedings, in other words, the people who have more of a life than me, this probably came as a shock. How could the DA's office, the very office that put Syed in jail in the first place, suddenly become so certain that he was innocent when, according to Serial, this was an unsolvable enigma? Well, without putting too fine a point on it, the answer is the power of story. Everybody involved in this case was telling a story. The detectives who first accused Adnan were telling and assembling a story. The DA who originally got him convicted was telling a story. Serial, for all of its fancy journalistic pretensions, was clearly telling a story. And, none of that is bad in and of itself, but when you set out to tell a story, it's often tempting to leave the truth by the wayside to just focus on the stuff that's interesting. And when an innocent man's freedom is at stake, that's a very dangerous game. So here to talk about all of those consequences are two people who I know have been following this case with interest. The first one I know was following it with interest because I first found out about Syed's motion the motion to get Adnan a new trial because she texted it to me, and that is Mandy Hauk. Mandy, how are you doing?
I'm good. And I actually first found out about the Adnan Syed case because of you.
Well, there we go. It just comes full circle.
It does, yes.
Yeah, we were texting each other updates, lots of surprised emojis, all that stuff.
Yes. Very excited emojis because it's about dang time. That's what I've got to say.
Yes, you'll soon see the narrative that we are taking on this podcast, listeners.
We are biased.
And
biased for truth.
Oh. That's a good tagline. When we start a true crime podcast after this, that's what it'll be called.
Bias for truth. Yes.
And our second guest here, longtime listeners will recognize her because she's been on at least two times, and that is Sarah Pottinger. She is the Anselm Society Arts Guild's resident detective story expert / true crime expert. So obviously we're going to invite her on to talk about this case. Sarah, how are you doing?
Good.
All right. Well, let me say one thing before we get going, Sarah. Thank you very much for your detective novel recommendations.
Yes.
Sarah's one of the people whose recommendations I take the most seriously. She works as a librarian at the library closest to my house. So she is our librarian, me and the kids.
It's my favorite library. It's all creaky. It's a Carnegie library.
It's old. It's very
it's the
old.
Oldest one in the district.
I love it.
Yeah. Has a ghost, maybe. Maybe.
That's actually just me. I break in every night. No, I'm kidding.
Moving the recycle bin around.
Yeah, that's me.
Yeah.
but yeah, Sarah is sort of my guiding light for detective fiction recommendations. And also, I really, really value her opinions on true crime because you know way more about it than me, and you have clearly thought about the implications way more than me. So Sarah, I will start off by asking you, I know you know something about the Adnan Syed case. I've never talked to you about it that I'm aware of, but I just know this. So tell us about your background with this case.
So I'm a lifelong mystery reader and true crime, I don't want to say enthusiast because that sounds ghoulish, but we'll say true crime consumer. Mm-hmm. And Serial was on my radar in 2014, and I think I didn't listen to it right away. I was kind of on the end of the big wave of popularity, and it was the first podcast I listened to. I didn't know what I was doing. I Googled where to go to listen to it, and I didn't have iTunes or anything, and I binge listened to it in 3 sittings, and was just fascinated. And I wouldn't say that I've been super following closely the case since then. I hadn't listened to Undisclosed until this week. But I did hear about the conviction being vacated, and I cheered. and then when you broached the subject of doing it on the podcast, I spent a whole day reading articles and catching up, and I read the Wikipedia page, and I know that Wikipedia is sketchy as a source.
Wikipedia is a great place to begin. It's a good place to begin research. Yes. You just should not end it there.
When you scroll down to the bottom and check all the links.
Yeah.
Yes.
If you just want a quick reminder of the details of the case, which is what I wanted. And then I would, if I had a question about something, I would click on the link and then read the article. And so I've done a lot of reading, and I feel like my brain is really full. I listened to 6 episodes of Undisclosed today, and I'm just bursting with
Let the listener understand.
details.
This is why, even before I knew that Sarah knew anything about Serial, I knew she'd be a perfect guest. So yes. Mandy, tell me about your experience with Serial.
Well, I think actually my introduction to the case of Adnan Syed happened after you and I had Sarah on the podcast in 2019, probably.
Yeah, probably.
Talking about true crime. imagine that. And afterward, you were saying something like, Adnan is innocent. And I was like, who's Adnan?
I remember that.
Yes. Yeah. And that is the true crime that I like to watch or read or listen to. I'm particularly intrigued by cold cases or falsely convicted. Like another really good podcast, if you haven't listened to it, is In the Dark. And that resulted in the overturning of a really bad conviction. Like that podcaster actually found the murder weapon. So that tells you how sloppy the investigation was. His name's Curtis Flowers, and it was in Louisiana. So that's another really, he was at Parchman Prison. But anyway, so those are the cases I really like to watch or listen to or read about, are the ones where some injustice has been done or justice has not yet been served. So you told me that I needed to listen to listen to Serial. I think that's the one you told me about. I don't think Undisclosed had come out yet.
It had. I probably recommended Undisclosed too, but as sort of companion piece.
I probably Googled Adnan Syed, and Serial is what came up. So yes, so I listened to that, and even though, as you said, Serial sort of wraps up, Sarah Koenig sort of wraps it up with like, do we know or do we not know? And I was like, no, we totally know. Of course Adnan was innocent. This is silly. But I hadn't even listened to Undisclosed yet, which you should probably explain what Undisclosed is.
Oh, thank you, Mandy.
You're welcome. There you go.
So my background, I found Serial, around when everyone else did. Everyone's all on social media. It's like, okay, you need to do this to be cool. And I'm like, well, I want to be cool, so here we go. So me and Danielle listened to it basically on a road trip. So we like binge listened to it on a road trip. We were both so in. We're both so hooked. So we get to the end of it, and I remember thinking, trying to think, because I was assuming for a long time, like, oh, he's probably guilty, trying to be like a contrarian.
You?
I know, it's shocking.
Yeah.
But then toward the end, I get to this point, I remember thinking, okay, do I think it's more likely than not that he's guilty? I don't know, but that's the reasonable doubt, so I don't think he should have been convicted. So I'd be like, it was an unfair trial, but I'm not going to say whether he's guilty or not. That was me trying to be like nuanced and like different. Okay.
Lawyerly.
So then fast forward a few weeks, month or so, and I find this post from a buddy from law school. And this buddy happens to be, in my opinion, he was my smartest classmate at my law school and is currently a law professor at a fancy law school himself.
Ooh.
So I took his opinions very seriously.
I would.
And he was talking about this podcast Undisclosed by some people, vaguely connected with Serial. It's like, whoa, they found a whole bunch of really serious Brady violations. This lawyer who's heading it up is brilliant. It's like, oh, so the smartest guy in my law school thinks this lawyer is brilliant. So, well, let's do it. So me and Danielle start listening to Undisclosed. And it was very early on. Like, you could tell that as opposed to Serial, which was put together by, Sarah Koenig, this very professional journalist, very gifted storyteller, huge production quality. This one was it seemed like something I would put together if I didn't have any of our tech people. So bad sound quality, the co-hosts were like talking too fast. It was all kind of tacky. They've re-recorded the early episodes.
All I've listened to are the re-recordings.
But the facts they gave blew my mind.
Right.
Because, this, again, someone who's vouched to me as a very brilliant lawyer, went through the case file as she reviewed it and basically proved the case that Adnan was innocent. I was like, oh, crap. I'm at a new vista here. So I kept going, following that whole season. They eventually left Adnan Syed's case because they exhausted it. Then they started doing new cases. And I've been a pretty regular listener to them for all their subsequent cases. I think they ended up doing between 25 and 30, like 28 cases.
I'm going to keep listening.
And about half of them have since led to exonerations.
That's amazing. And then the lead lawyer is actually a family friend of Adnan Syed's.
No, this is a good point. Thank you. I should have brought this up earlier. But there was a 3-lawyer team. And again, maybe I'm biased because I'm a lawyer. It's like the lawyers can do it better than the journalists.
Well, but they did. And I'm not a lawyer. It made more sense to me.
The sort of... She didn't do most of the investigating, but she was sort of like the anchor of it, was Rabia Chowdhury, who is the family friend of the Syed family, who first alerted Sarah Koenig to the story. So she's on Serial briefly, but Rabia is also a lawyer. So she ended up sending the case file to 2 other lawyers who just heard about the story on Serial, and they were like doing smart blogs on it, so she sends it to them. One of them's named Colin Miller. He's a law professor at the University of South Carolina. He does evidence law, so, very accomplished lawyer with a very prestigious job. And the other one, Susan Simpson, is really the engine behind the show. She's the one my friend was vouched for as being brilliant, and she is. She's just an incredible investigator, and she was able to just figure out stuff based on the same information that the Serial people had. She's maybe the single biggest reason that Adnan ended up getting free.
Wow.
Like, some of that information that they discussed was mentioned in the state's brief, right?
I don't know if I'm jumping ahead, but I mean, when I was listening to Undisclosed today, I was just blown away by the level of detail.
Yeah.
Like, so-and-so's memory has to be wrong because they think it's this day, but she was in class that day. Or this couldn't be this day because there was a track meet that day. And the level of intricacy that she went into, I would love to do stuff like that. That fascinates me.
And absolutely. And just for those interested listeners, Undisclosed has since stopped full-time production. But Susan Simpson has gone on to do this other true crime project called Proof. It's another podcast. They've had 1 season so far, and it's really good. So
Rabia and Colin are going to do another.
They're doing another project.
It's not up yet.
Yeah.
So
Yep. All right. So that's sort of all the facts. So now what I want to do, now that we sort of set the baseline, is go through the different narratives.
Yes.
Because there's at least 3 big schools of narratives here. They vary drastically from each other, and I think let's go through how each one's constructed as storytellers. Something else I should have mentioned about you, Sarah, is you are also a writer, and you are a fantastic detective novel writer.
Well, she just got her MFA in creative writing.
Yes, I did.
So listeners, again, I am a detective novel enthusiast. Sarah is a detective novel pro. So
I am here for fun. I don't know. Why am I here?
You're a storyteller.
We are all storytellers here.
Okay.
So as storytellers, because as we get into the cop / the original DA's story, that's something I really want to emphasize from the outset. My day job, I'm a trial attorney. And when you're taking a case to trial and you're, having other more experienced lawyers tell you how to do that, the main thing everyone will tell you is you need a story. You need a narrative, you need a theme. And all the evidence, all the stuff you have revolves around that theme. And people do that because we have all these, rich lawyers did their homework and they realized that's how you persuade a jury. Again, stories are powerful. So this is the exact same thing that the DA did, and we'd expect them to do that. But this also thing that the cops did, which we might hope a cop isn't just trying to let a narrative run ahead. But regardless, let's not skip it. So how about this? I'll do a bare bones recitation.
Okay.
And Sarah, if there's anything you think I missed or you want to just add, just cut me off and say, hey, here's an important fact.
Okay.
Okay, so again, according to the cops, is sort of the story presented at trial. Heyman Lee's last seen on January 13th, 1999, leaving school. She's a senior at Woodlawn High School. She leaves between 2:15, 2:30, and according to the cops, at this point, Adnan Syed, who was her sort of on-again, off-again boyfriend, at this time, they were off again.
They'd been off since December.
Yes, and Hay had recently started dating this other guy, Donnie, who she was apparently very, very...
obsessed with.
Yeah, she was very much happy to be with Donnie. Okay. So according
Not
to
even 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Right.
Their
She
first
was
date was
obsessed.
on January 1st.
She-
and
Yeah.
she disappeared on the 13th.
Exactly. So she
it's
was
very quick.
Dun,
Yes.
dun, dun.
She was super into it very quickly.
And
but,
Adnan had dated a few other girls too.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So they had dated, they'd broken up. Indications are sort of a normal teenage breakup, whatever. Okay. So the story of the state is that this breakup devastated Adnan, who you all should know. His parents, I believe, were from Pakistan, so children of immigrants. So the state gets this really disturbing / phony baloney quotations cultural report from some lady with no obvious expertise, talking about how, well, in the Pakistani culture, Adnan felt his honor was affronted by Hay leaving him and dating another man. Adnan gave Hay a gift of a scarf, which marked her as his own. It's like, what? That's what? But anyway, so the theory is he feels his honor is affronted. So in order to make up for this, Hay has to be murdered, right? So Adnan sort of talks his way into Hay's car at about 2:15, somehow manages to drive like this 25 to 30 minute drive to a local Best Buy in 15 minutes. Adnan then murders Hay in the middle of the day at a parking lot, somehow gets the body into the trunk, again, in a crowded parking lot.
In the middle of the day.
Calls Jay Wilds, who is this sort of dude who graduated from Woodlawn the year before. He's sort of, he's sort of those dudes, if you needed to buy pot, you'd buy it from him. Never gotten into any major trouble, but lots of minor trouble. Known as a chronic liar, but he also dates one of Adnan's friends, so they're like connected. So Adnan calls Jay and says, hey, you need to help me bury this body. And Adnan coincidentally lent Jay his car earlier in the day. So Jay goes along with it. They go on this wild ride. The story changes drastically over at least 8 separate versions of what Jay tells, because every version he changes his story wildly. But the bare bones is at some point, the trunk is popped and Jay sees, the body. And at some point, he helps Adnan bury the body in this local park, Lincoln Park in Baltimore, around 7 in the evening. The rest of the details vary wildly, but then that day, they apparently go to a friend of a friend's house, not her real name, Kathy, from Serial, whose actual name is Chrissy. That's come out, so it's not like a secret. And Adnan's behaving weirdly, so there's lots of talk on Serial about that. Okay, and along with that, the 2 pieces of evidence the state uses are, 1, the testimony of Jay, who, apparently went along with it and helped bury the body, and 2 was cell phone evidence. Jay had Adnan's cell phone in his car when Jay was borrowing it, and the 2 obviously had the cell phone together. So they received a series of calls throughout the day, and it says which cell phone tower pinged the call off of, right? So the cops assume, oh, cool, it's like a GPS, so we can just see which cell tower it pings and follow the trip around. So Jay's story conforms, very closely with the cell phone pings.
Conforms.
So between the cell towers, remember, giving the state's
Giving the bare bones.
yes,
Sorry.
giving the state's case.
Yes.
Between Jay's testimony and the cell phone towers, which map perfectly with what Jay's saying, and Jay also later revealed where Adnan had parked Hay's car. Okay, all those things together suggest Adnan is this jilted boyfriend who, because of his Pakistani honor, must murder his ex-lover for honor and stuff.
Honor killing.
Yeah, in honor killing. So those are the bare bones facts. Sarah, any facts you wanted to emphasize that I left off?
I don't think so. What I have is more specific to DNA.
Okay.
So I think you summarized it well.
Well, thank you. So let's talk about that as a story. Again, we'll talk about the very big problems with the story later, but just as a narrative, Mandy, do you find that compelling? Could you understand why the jurors, having only heard that story, would convict him?
That's a really hard thing to answer because having only heard that story, and I mean, I know that the state really tried to emphasize that Jay had no reason to lie.
Jay ended up getting a conviction for accessory to murder after the fact. ended up just getting
Right.
probation, whatever. But
Right.
he was charged with a serious crime afterwards.
Right, but they presented it like, why would Jay lie? Because if he hadn't come forward, we would have never known he was accessory. Therefore, he put himself in trouble. So clearly, he's an altruistic hero or whatever. Sorry, sarcasm. Font. I mean, I can sort of see why, particularly, and something that has always bothered me is. As you said, this is the DA's story, but initially it was the cop's story.
Yeah.
And what are the cops doing crafting a story? And what is the DA doing just taking that and running with it instead of looking into it? Like, that's what's disturbing. But I'm getting off of your actual question. Yes, I understand why they convicted. Particularly, I don't remember anything about jury selection, but to me, the cultural bias / racism was brutal. It's not a very heavily Muslim community.
Yeah, it's that was a question I had. Like, does Baltimore have a sizable Muslim population? Like, I don't know that answer.
It didn't seem like it, because I know, like, in the Undisclosed podcast, one of the reasons that the timelines were confirmed to have been incorrect was because his Adnan's track coach specifically remembered talking to him about Ramadan, which I thought that was a really cool thing of a coach to do, to just ask him, tell me about it. What is it? And so that is why he remembered that Adnan was there that day, is because they had a specific conversation about what Ramadan means and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I don't think, I don't think Baltimore is like super, Muslim aware, I guess.
Okay.
And I mean, he was observing, but I don't know.
No, that makes sense. So basically, and again, we'll get into these.
And this was a long time ago. This was 99.
It was 2000.
Right. I mean, I guess if it would even be more understandable that they would have done that if it was post 9/11, but
it was before.
Yeah, that's interesting. I just realized it was pre 9/11.
Yeah.
But still, there was a lot of Muslim scare.
Yeah, how about you, Sarah? Let's put you on the jury again. We all know we know that there are lots of holes with the state's case we present. We'll get to those in a bit. But having just heard what I laid out to you, can you, if you're on the jury, can you see yourself coming in with a guilty conviction?
No. But I can see how other people would. We'll put it that way.
There we go. Okay.
I was trying to be generous, but yes. I would hope I wouldn't.
So what was your take of that narrative then?
It just how much depended on someone whose story was so wildly inconsistent. And I just worry about any time the balance weighs too heavily on people and their recollections, because things change and people's motivations are different. And the fact that they probably wouldn't have been able to charge him at all without Jay's various stories. I lost my train of thought.
Did that come forward in the trial? Because I'm trying to erase from my brain when he asked, with this hypothetical, would I have convicted? I'm trying to assume I don't know some of the stuff I do know now.
Yeah.
Was it, because we know that the appeal in 2018 was based on insufficient counsel.
Yes.
Because
so
Adnan's lawyer was terrible and
here is the state story. And again, like, we all know the DA did a lot of very inappropriate conduct. Like, it was bad. But
I just don't know if the jury knew that the story was
the jury knew that the story changed often.
Okay.
However, the way the DA handled that, I think they handled it pretty adeptly, saying like, hey, Jay's a liar, okay? We all know that. He tells lies all the time. We all know people who lie, okay? Let's look at the core stuff that we can confirm. Let's hold up his evidence against the cell towers.
Okay.
Whoa, it matches.
Okay.
Let's see what he was able to do. Whoa, he led us to her car. How did he know where it was? Even liars sometimes have to be witnesses. We got stuck with a witness who's a liar. Okay. So take the main core, use that, and they kind of use his lying nature as to make their timeline kind of amoeba-like. It can always change no matter what. Use that to their advantage, and then they pair that with the cell tower evidence, and they pair it with how they portray Adnan. And that's one of the things that I think they did effectively, even though it's terrible what they did.
Right.
Because they're depending on a time when, maybe Baltimore has a sizable Muslim population, I don't know, but in the community, I think we can say that the vast majority of people, 100% people on the jury, aren't Muslims, right? The vast majority of people on the jury were probably more similar to Jay than to anyone else related to the case, right? They see Jay as someone they recognize, someone who'd be in their community. Adnan, not really.
So much. Right.
Yeah, so when you have this really goofy profile about, Pakistani honor culture, if that's what's presented to you, that can make for a compelling story, as disturbing as we all find it. The long and short of it is to say, erasing everything else that I know, I don't blame the jurors at all for convicting him, based on what was presented to them at trial, which is all they had to go off of. When you have the evidence of this dude who, he's a liar, but whatever, you can pick out details that you find with this quote-unquote scientific evidence of the cell phone towers, and something's not right about this Adnan kid.
So sort of a broken clock is right twice a day.
Yeah, exactly.
Theory.
Exactly.
Okay.
I don't blame the jurors at all.
Okay.
All right. Anything else we want to say about the narrative presented by the state? All right. Well, that'll be brought up as we talk about the other ones, but that's sort of the narrative that was initially presented in 2000. So now let's fast forward to 2014 in Serial. Sarah Koenig makes it very clear, she's not a professional investigator, blah, 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 blah. She's, a journalist telling a story, and she does tell a compelling story.
Yes, she does.
Her story is brought to her attention by Rabia Chowdhury, who, again, family friend of the Syed family, also an attorney. She just has been enraged at this injustice for years. Basically throws a Hail Mary by giving it to a national reporter. Okay. And her story just tries to paint a lot. She tries her best, give her the benefit of the doubt. She tries to repaint the facts, or tries to re-examine it. So she does a lot of analysis of Adnan and Hayes' relationship, the fact that it was on again, off again. Adnan seemed okay that Hayes was someone else. Hayes was clearly over the moon for Dawn. So all that stuff. They talked to different friends, because Hay and Adnan were at the magnet program at Woodlawn High School, so sort of like the smart kid club with the school within the school.
Right, so a very small population. They were all
They all seem pretty friendly with each other. Right. So they do that. Sarah's big things were, one, Hay leaving school at about 2:15 to the quote-unquote, Serial fans will recognize this instantly, I'm rolling my eyes, come and get me call at 2:36 from the parking lot of Best Buy. So Sarah spends an awful lot of audio time figuring out, is it possible for Adnan and Hay to drive from the school to the Best Buy from 2:15 to 2:36? They end up getting there 2 minutes over, but Sarah's like, close enough, it's possible.
Right.
Not factoring in the amount of time it takes to murder someone and hide the body and then walk across.
Right, because they actually tested live on the pod, not live, but they drove it to see how long it would take.
They do a brief interview with Jay. They try to present all the evidence very much through the eyes of the two lead investigators, Detective Ritz and Detective McGillivray. You can tell she, without meaning to, just sort of takes their account of what happened verbatim is sort of like the starting point.
Yeah, she seemed to trust them, but to be looking for ways they might have made honest mistakes.
Yeah, exactly. She assumes that they're good cops who are trying their best.
Right, and they just might have messed up.
Yes, exactly. There's a lot of talk about them. A lot of talk about cell phone tower. Another big story that she has is the fact that they apparently went to this girl, not her real name, Kathy. Again, her actual name is Chrissy. Sometime after burying the body, in that not her real name, Kathy, talks about Adnan, who's this kid she doesn't really know, friend of a friend of a friend, who's acting all weird in the corner. It's like, ooh, had he murdered someone? All this stuff.
Can I just say that is my least favorite, or that is the thing that gets me the most angry. Whenever there's some kind of true crime thing, they're like, oh, they were acting weird. I'm like, what is weird? Because define weird.
Yeah.
Particularly, she said she didn't know him that well. So what do you mean by weird?
Yeah, and how much of that is hindsight?
Well, and also he was in jail all day. He was
the
high.
fact.
That makes you act weird, I've heard. I don't know.
So some other essential aspects of the narrative is the assumption that the cops first zeroed in on Adnan after Jay came forward.
Correct.
Jay apparently comes forward to them. That's when they first start focusing on Adnan, which is like 4 weeks after.
And then everything is confirmation bias from then on.
That is the narrative, and then the narrative is like Jay finds the car, blah 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 blah. Okay. So there we go. Sarah, what was your take? Let's go back in time to Sarah listening to the serial in 2014. What was your take on the storytelling prowess of Sarah Koenig, and what conclusion that storytelling prowess led you to?
She tells a really good story. It's incredibly compelling, and it's easy to see how infatuated with it everyone became, and how it was like the thing to listen to. But I feel like her main focus, whether she said so or not, was to tell a compelling story and was not necessarily looking for the truth. I think it's easy to say you're doing that, but you also want people to listen to your podcast and have all these downloads and get well known for your awesome podcast. And I just think that it leans more toward giving weight to the, I don't know what the word is, the appeal of a story that makes sense rather than what actually might have happened.
Yeah, I agree with you. Are there any particular ways you saw that sort of warping serial, like letting the adult facts get in the way of a good story?
I think it started with a lot of assumptions already. And like Mandy said about taking the cops at face value and assuming their intent. And I think that's a dangerous place to start from. You're already putting out a filtered narrative through your assumption about these cops.
No, and that is an example where I totally agree with you. I think one of her core false assumptions was that, these detectives, I assume they're good guys trying to do their honest best. And you can see, Sarah Koenig, this rich white lady in Manhattan, that's probably her experience, but that's a lot of our experience, so that's not the universal experience. And when we look at the stats, it should not have been anyone's experience for Baltimore cops in the late 90s.
No.
But that's looking ahead. Mandy, your take.
I also think there was a Romeo and Juliet. I don't know, she probably even used that term. I don't know if I'm remembering that because she used it, but that's sort of, I remember getting that feeling, that she spent a lot of time talking about the relationship between Heyman and Adnan and sort of making it a compelling story because of their youth, their young love, their breakup. Was he brokenhearted? She left that up in the air. And the cultural, the culture clash, because she is Asian. I'm trying to recall.
I believe her family is from Korea. And Adnan's
Adnan's Pakistan.
Seems like both families are relatively recent immigrants.
And both families were extremely strict. So both Heyman and Adnan had to keep all of their dating completely secret. And
the forbidden love across cultures.
Exactly. The forbidden love across cultures. And so, I mean, that obviously is very compelling for story. And so I think she latched onto that more than the truth really needed that the truth didn't need that focus. Truth seeking didn't need the focus of, oh, their curfew stuff. And, anyway, that didn't really actually have a bearing on what happened to Heyman on January 13th. That had no bearing. Their little love story, not really.
Yeah. So just a few other things about Serial. And again, I agree. Like, this is like something I think is obvious. Sarah Koenig, whatever else we can say about Serial, she and the rest of that team are just masterful storytellers. They did a fantastic job crafting a narrative from this.
Absolutely. And this was also my first podcast I ever listened to. And she ruined me for a lot of other podcasts.
Yeah.
Because
Serial.
she's so good at, one of the things is she describes what she's seeing. And the same is true for In the Dark, and that's why I like that. But there have been other true crime podcasts where they're just sort of reporting it, and I need to envision what the reporter is seeing. Like, I knock on the door, and and so yes, absolutely brilliant storytellers, setting the whole thing, character, narrative, dialogue.
Yeah, and we will very quickly get to the mistakes Serial made. And we can go through those in detail in a bit. But first, I want to, I don't know, maybe I'm psychoanalyzing. To me, one of the things I keep putting around in my head were these mistakes just like honest goof-ups, like people at Serial, they're great at telling story, they're not great investigators. And they honestly tried to tell the truth, they just failed. Or is it, truth, what is truth? Here's a cool story. We'll use these facts to, put together a story. And the story they wanted to tell was this compelling human interest story. Is he the murderer? Who's to say? And I don't know. Sarah, do you get an impression about what the, can you find like the original sin of Serial?
Oh my gosh, all the pressure. I don't. I think it just boils down to intent, and there's like no way to know what the intent was. I think in trying to craft a compelling story, she brought out what was compelling to her, like their relationship,
right.
And the obsession with could they have gotten from the school to the Best Buy parking lot, and spending a lot of time on those specific things because they were interesting to her.
Yeah.
And I think, that I don't necessarily think that's something that would happen if her original intent was to find out the truth.
Interesting. Yeah. No, that you could be right. And let's sort of now go to the truth. Best as we can figure it out. Notice the narrative spin I'm putting on this now.
Hey, bias for the truth.
Now, me as the narrator is putting forward the heroes in juxtaposition with the two negative examples. Here's the positive example. In that positive example is the undisclosed team.
Right.
Okay, so let's go through the undisclosed narrative and see how it differs from the Serial / cops narrative. So I think the first thing they did was just tear down all of the lazy assumptions, right? One of the opening scenes in Serial, ironically enough, is establishing, hey, people don't remember what happened, 4 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago.
Right.
Like, memories just don't work that way. Like, Mandy, what were you doing 3 Thursdays before last?
I don't know.
Exactly. You don't know. None of us know. It would be crazy if you knew.
Right. So they were like, of course Adnan didn't remember his day.
Yeah. But then after starting with that premise, she abandons it. And she uses very sketchy testimony as givens. So let's start off with the testimony that Hay must have left the school by 2:15 because, she remembered there's this witness who remembers that Hay was supposed to go to a wrestling match that night, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, The undisclosed team put together the fact that, hey, let's check if there was a wrestling match that night. There wasn't. There was one like a few weeks, earlier or later. So this witness was misremembering something. Then I'll jump ahead to not her real name, Kathy's apartment. Were they actually there that same night? No, because
she had a class.
Yeah, Chrissy had a winter semester class, which are those super intensive, like 5-6 hour days. There's only a few classes. You better be there. One of her 3 class days was that night. And she also connected this very clearly in her memory. There's an anchor memory that she went to a conference she had to go to for a class, and then came right back home, and Jay and this weirdo are waiting for her. That conference, again, undisclosed team just looked it up, this conference happened 2 weeks later. So it couldn't have been on that night. All that stuff is irrelevant. They also, Susan Simpson manages to find a cover page for the cell phone tower data. A cover page which apparently was never disclosed to the defense that said, these cell phone tower pings are not reliable to determine location. And they talked to cell phone experts who said, yeah, here's my example. When you make a call, which cell phone tower hits it, it's sort of like playing Plinko. It's based on so many jostlings, like this tower's full, so we go to this other one. There's a tree in the way there, so we go to this one. It's so random that it's basically irrelevant. One cell phone expert said something to the effect of, well, the pings tell us that whoever made the call wasn't in Brazil. So the cops either misunderstood or willfully misunderstood and used it as GPS. And they then used that to guide Jay's story.
Well, yeah.
And the big assumption that they break down is this question that probably a lot of us had at Cyril. If Jay didn't have some basis of fact, why did he come forward to the cops and expose himself to serious criminal charges? Again, he was actually convicted of accessory after the fact to murder, which is I don't think I need to say is a serious charge. Well, when you look at it, a lot of cops, not all, not even most, some cops, and in Baltimore, more than some cops at that time, I think Baltimore's gotten better.
Yeah, there are other cases.
Baltimore's gotten better since then.
They have a record.
Where cops, if you want to get a conviction and you don't super duper care about the truth, what you do is you latch onto a suspect and then you create a truth around him. So one way to do this is you find someone connected who has a criminal past, and Jay presumably had some low-level drug dealing, the sort of stuff you can threaten a 19-year-old kid who doesn't know what's going on. So you bring him in, say, hey, you better help us. We know this odd-and-odd kid's guilty for reasons we're not going to disclose. Just take our word for it, he's guilty. You need to help us, and if you don't, we'll charge you with the murder or charge you with drug dealing, whatever, you're in prison forever. And then they use the map that they get from their GPS theory cell phone towers, and Jay is more than happy to lie as much as possible to fit the cop's story. And that's how you get the Jay knowing stuff the cops told him off camera, and that's how you get the story that keeps changing as the cops' understanding of the cell phone towers keeps changing. That's what happened. And when you look at it, it's actually pretty simple. The enigma of Jay is simple. Dirty cops bullied him into doing it. Yep. Okay. All right. Anything from that you wanted to point out, Sarah? Because I know you had notes on some related topics.
Not about that specifically. I was floored by, we were talking about it off mic earlier, about how Susan Simpson's obsessive listening to the cops interviewing Jay, and how you can, even before the audio is cleaned up, you can hear these long pauses where he doesn't know how to answer a question.
20, 30 seconds, which is a really long pause if you're just telling.
So it's like, okay, so after you stop by Chrissy's house, where did you go next?
Long pause.
Just silent.
And then you hear a tapping, and it's definitely tapping on paper. And a couple of times you hear paper shuffling, but it sounds like a tap on paper. And then all of a sudden, he has the answer, and it's the answer they want.
And sometimes he says, "Oh, sorry, I missed something."
And the apologizing, it's like, why are you
and-
apologizing for telling the truth? Because
Quote,
maybe it's not the
unquote.
truth.
Yeah,
Right.
and she also, another thing I thought related to that Susan Simpson did so well is there are some documents that actually were disclosed, and those include a map of the area and a chronology of quote-unquote Jay's testimony. And what she did was she cross-referenced these sort of tapping to specific areas on the chart. It's like, oh, they must have been tapping to this headline because it says like trunk pop. Because you'll see like Jay go, what happened next? Sorry. Like an actor trying to remember his lines. And tap, tap. Then he reads the headline, pop. Oh, yeah, okay. So then we go and Adnan pops the trunk.
Yep.
And then I notice Adnan's wearing these gray gloves. Like, Adnan, where are you wearing those gloves? And then like you can see the tag like, okay, whoa.
Yeah, they stop
tap.
him and they redirect
Try to
him.
redirect.
And every street name he remembered is on the map
And
for that the cops
the
disclosed.
only ones
The
he
only one, yeah.
remembered.
The only ones that he remembered. Other times he would not name the street. And yeah, the only streets he named were on the map already.
And again, under normal circumstances, saying that cops are basically feeding information to witnesses, that is a serious charge. It's not something that should be undertaken lightly, and the undisclosed people don't undertake it lightly, but
No.
they point out
Right.
these cops have been shown to have done it before on previous convictions that have been thrown out.
Well,
this was
cops are humans.
it's
So-
some
They're
humans are
under
good,
pressure.
some humans are bad. And they're
Yeah.
when those humans are under pressure to get a conviction,
Yeah.
it's not find the truth, it's convict someone, okay?
Well, to me, I will say I do think the cops really believed he did it. And so they were trying to make the case that he did. I don't know why so I don't think they were like, oh, we just need to charge someone, anyone. This guy looks good. I think they really did think he did it. But I don't think that's how cops are supposed to work. I think even if they have an idea of who did it, they have to follow the evidence. They can't.
Yeah, you don't shape things
Right.
around your
You would think
assumption.
that all these cops having to work that hard to make the testimony work, I would hope that they would say, hey, wait a minute, maybe it's not Adnan. But
And that's interesting. And again, like listeners, just so we're clear,
They believe their
are
own
not,
story.
We're not dumping on all cops, right?
no,
No,
not at all. No,
I
like
love
I said,
cops.
these are
Yeah.
individuals.
Yeah, it's just-
these are human individuals, and humans are fallible, and individuals are fallible.
In like the 20 years since, we've looked at specific departments in specific cities. Like Philadelphia had this problem. They've since gotten better.
Columbus.
Yeah, Baltimore, again, at this time, had these severe problems, and now Baltimore's
Right.
starting to reckon with it,
Right.
to their credit. Cyril's also done some stuff on, like, certain departments in, like, rural Georgia. Or, like, there was a team of hotshot cold case investigators. Like, some investigators, for whatever myriad reasons, will lock in on a suspect right away. That's clearly what they did with Adnan. They look through it's looking at the investigation notes. It's clear, even before they found Hayes' body, way before they talked to Jay, they were only looking at Adnan. They're only interviewing Adnan's teachers. They don't interview Hayes' teachers.
Right.
They don't bother getting Hayes' cell phone records. They get Adnan's records. They locked in on him right away. And that's common in false conviction cases.
It's like they fall in love with their own story.
Oh,
Yeah.
exactly. Oh,
Yeah.
good way to bring it. So that is their own personal narrative.
Right.
And I agree with you, Mandy. Hearing a lot of these people get interviewed on these where it's like, look at the evidence, dude. You screwed up, admit it. But it's like,
Admit it, right.
they will just go to the rug for it.
I just had a gut feeling.
Yeah,
I just
exactly.
know. I can tell when people
Internalize
are
it.
lying.
It's
and
the
that
narrative.
becomes the truth.
The narrative
for
they
them.
tell to themselves.
And then it's sort of a sunk cost fallacy.
Yeah. Where if you assume these are like not, if they're people with the semblance of a conscience, which we assume vast majority of people are, the thought that I sent an innocent person to prison for 20 years,
Yeah, that's hard to
that's
take.
unacceptable. So I'm
Right.
going to tell myself this story that he actually did do it, and I'm a good cop, and good cops convict the bad guys. I'm a good cop, so there we
And
go.
he's a bad guy.
Yeah.
Yep.
Way to bring that in. So the narrative, that's another thing. Like
I talk about that later in answering the questions you raised.
Oh, good, good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are very close to the final round of questions there. So anything else we want to talk about Let's talk briefly about so Marilyn Mosby, again, is the state's attorney for Baltimore. So she's basically in charge of, who they're going to bring convictions against and all this. And she seems, I don't know what else she's doing. So maybe there's other political things I disagree with. But for this thing, a lot of big cities are doing this now. It's election integrity boards. So basically they go through, look at past convictions and think, apart from the legal process, like, did we screw this up?
Well, I think they had to in his case because he was 17. He was tried as an adult, but I think there's some Maryland statute that says if someone, is that right, Sarah? You're nodding.
Yeah, I just read it either today or yesterday in an article about looking at cases of people, I think 18 and under, who were convicted and have been in prison for more than 20 years.
They're required to review the case.
Yeah.
And so that was why initially she looked at it, because she had to. So.
Yeah, and if any listeners are interested, like the brief they filed, which the judge granted, a couple weeks ago, you can read it online. I read it. And it's really interesting because her office investigated this independently for over a year. And they mentioned some of the stuff that was brought up on Undisclosed, so that's kind of interesting. Some of the facts that the Susan Simpsons of the world found. And also they bring up that there are alternate suspects that they have found, in which were, in some cases, eliminated by the original detectives for no good reason. Like they kind of fudged a polygraph result to get one out. And again, you can see the motivated reason, like, ooh.
Because it doesn't fit.
Yeah, this doesn't fit.
And how do you live with that as a cop, that you put an innocent guy in prison when you felt so proud that you had caught the bad guy?
Yeah, like that's your identity as a cop.
That's hard.
You put bad guys away.
Yeah.
And like I was just listening to Undisclosed along these lines, where they found like a brandy bottle really close to to the body. And there wasn't a lot of trash around it, but there was a brandy bottle like a few feet away. They could have gotten DNA from it. Like they found there's human DNA, but they found out from other sources, Adnan doesn't drink. So that's not going to be his DNA, so let's not test it.
I think that was on cereal, too. I remember the brandy bottle on cereal.
Yes.
Yeah.
Since you're bringing up DNA.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
So
go, girl.
I'm kind of like, my side interest in my true crime enthusiasm is forensic science. So I've probably read more about forensic science than I have about true crime cases. So there are some things I knew, but I did a little research this week to refresh my memory, because I read in one of the articles that part of the motion is to have some DNA on her clothing, shoes, and what was the other thing? Clothing, shoes, and the rape kit tested. The motion states that those were never tested before. And I was like, excuse me?
What?
Yeah.
Did I read that right? So I went back. This is in 1999.
Yeah.
1980s was when the first genetic testing using DNA started. So that's like not even 20 years before. In the, I think it's like the mid 1990s, they came up with a faster method that calls for a comparatively small amount of DNA compared to the previous method. The first time DNA was used in a criminal case was in 1986, and it was in the UK.
No, I
That's
remember
older than I would've-
I was taking a criminal justice class in 1991 in college, the year I graduated from college, and I remember them talking about DNA. So, I mean, it was there.
It was there. It was new.
Available to them.
Yeah. 1987 was the first conviction based on DNA evidence. CODIS, which we all know from CSI and all those shows, it's the combined DNA index system, and it combines any state databases with the national database. That didn't start until 1998, which I did not know.
Oh.
And the chances that Baltimore was part of CODIS in 1999 are slim. There was an accreditation process labs had to go through to be able to join in CODIS.
Well, weren't there like legal matters like privacy? Because I know some like private, like, what am I trying to say? Civil rights attorneys don't like CODIS.
Slower.
Okay.
As it became used more and more.
Okay.
And it's been a slower process. So the actual likelihood that evidence that you're like, hello, DNA, there's probably DNA everywhere. The likelihood that was tested back in 1999 is slim because maybe the lab wasn't accredited. There are certain levels you have to hit for something to be uploaded to CODIS, and if you can't meet that, you have to retest the DNA. And this is like, if they hadn't got onto that newer way to test, it would have been at least 6 to 8 weeks turnaround time. And like as soon as they started DNA testing, they were having a backlog because everyone wants to do it.
So it sounds like
there's a lot.
We hear they didn't get the DNA testing, and like based on the narrative I've been putting out, it's tempted to go like, corruption, but there could be legitimate reasons why they couldn't have done it.
Yeah.
Okay.
It could be. Did they have the technology?
That's a good corrective on my narrative right now.
What are we don't know the amounts of DNA they had to work with. We don't know how, if they did test anything, it uses up the DNA that's there when it tests. So you can use up a sample and then it's gone and you can't retest.
Get one shot at it.
Right.
You don't know how it's collected or stored. Stuff can degrade. And they're only, like in the last, I don't know, maybe 20 or 30 years are getting to the point where degradation is not as big of a problem for testing. And there's always like time, cost, and priority considerations. Because I was asking myself, well, why didn't they, as technology got better, why didn't they go back and test? Well, it's going to be a lower priority on a case that's technically solved.
Yeah.
Right.
With a convicted person in prison.
Right.
It's not a priority.
And again, like we all view it as, this is the serial case, but then it's like one of, lots of people get murdered in Baltimore, as lots of people get murdered in most big American cities. So
correct.
They're not, the resources are limited.
That case is closed.
You can't use every resource for every case. Especially, you can assume a lot of the lab techs are hearing from the cops, like, oh, we totally have the guy, so don't worry about it.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah. No, that's a good corrective.
So that was something that really caught me, and I needed to know, like, what is the story behind this mention that this stuff has never been tested.
And this is this level of detail we need to actually get to the truth of things. You see, I'm telling these cops, why do they not blah, blah, blah? And Sarah's like, well, here's the reasons why. Oh, okay. Then. So let's sort of go in, the time we have left, talk about some big picture stuff here. So one of these things, like most obviously, what does all this say about, the power of story, which again is the theme of not only this podcast, but like all the podcasts we do, Mandy?
Yes.
Like what did this make you think about, like, story's power?
I think clearly we've shown that the story itself, it has to be cohesive, it has to be compelling. The narrator is going to choose the angle that is compelling to them, as Sarah Koenig did. To me also, if I could, Gutierrez was his lawyer.
Yeah, so Adnan's trial attorney back in 2000.
Who passed away just a couple years after the trial, I think.
She was in bad health at the time,
right,
so she passed away several years later.
Yeah. But I remember the worst parts about listening to Serial was whenever they would play audio from the trial, because she was really hard to listen to.
Yes.
So hard to listen to. And I mean, you even take away the fact that she did not present very obvious, like, hello, alibi witness, all this stuff that she could have presented. So his appeal in 2018, the fact that they lost that is crazy to me because she really was insufficient counsel, and I think they showed that. But her voice, her cadence, the way she asked questions, the narrator matters as much as the narrative.
Yeah.
No, that's a really great point. I'm glad you brought it up because, again, I'm a trial attorney, so I ask witnesses those same questions. Well, not for like murder stuff. I just do civil stuff, but
They
one of the
have
things
to
they
like
tell you is
right?
you need to tell a story with your questioning. The jury needs to know why you're asking a question.
Right.
So your intonation matters. The things you choose to ask matters, and you can get lost in the weeds. I remember one of the things for me listening to the Gutierrez stuff is one. I agree. Her cadence was just off. Like you got the feeling she wasn't talking like a human.
No.
And also, she would get so caught up in going down little rabbit trails to establish minor things that in the end, I'm thinking, again, as a lawyer who should be like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, it sounded like she had no case because she was focusing on such tiny little things.
One of the things they tell us is, trial attorneys is make your point, make the point clear, then get out of there.
Get out.
Leave the jury with just the good point. Mm-hmm. And she didn't seem to do it. It seems like for whatever reason, maybe it was she was in bad health. There's It's just, but she seemed to not succeed in the narrative in the way the state did.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. How about you, Sarah? What was your take just on the power of story here? What this show's about it?
I had quite the little philosophical afternoon answering these questions. It was very, things I have not done with my brain in a while. I'm just going to read my notes because they're good. There's the truth. There's a story of what actually happened. That's a thing that exists. Mm-hmm. But there's no telling when or if it will ever fully be known. And as time passes, those chances continue to decrease. So there's this thing, there is a story of what actually happened. But any narrative that comes out is only an attempt at that story. Mm-hmm. Our brains are wired for story. There's research on that. Mm-hmm. It's fascinating. I can recommend books, of course. They will create a story where it doesn't exist. They will fill in the gaps of incomplete ones, and they will cling to whatever narrative best helps us sleep at night, which explains these cops who are like dead set that the right person was in prison. The power of story is what made Serial so compelling. And whether or not that was the original intent, it can't claim to have presented the whole truth. But it did raise questions about the narrative at that time. And much more importantly, it drew attention to how shaky the state's story was. Mm-hmm. And with it ending all ambiguously, it's like, ooh, was he or wasn't he? But I think the fact that the compelling story that was told, whether it was the truth or not, and none of us believe that it was, it brought national spotlight to this case that otherwise nobody would have talked about.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, it's so powerful. Yeah.
Again, like Susan Simpson, Colin Miller, they never would have found out about the story if it wasn't for the podcast, right? Mm-hmm. And so in that regard, absolutely, you can point to something. So related to that, then, so we are all people who, because we're all here, we are fascinated by stories. Mm-hmm. We like constructing our own stories. Should that give any of us pause in how we go about doing this, knowing like, hey, this is something powerful I'm about to do here, telling a story?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to have enough detail on this, but this is just reminding me of a true crime. I think it was Dateline Secrets Uncovered or something like that, that Peter and I were watching. And we were 100% convinced that this couple had murdered his parents. Because we were like, we were just convinced that they had. And they absolutely didn't. And it was proven because a completely different guy confessed to it and then like DNA. So there is no doubt that couple was 100% innocent, and I was 100% sure that they were guilty, and so was Peter. And we watched it 2 weeks ago, and we've talked about it like 3 times since then. I'm like, I still can't believe. And when I say I can't believe, what I'm stunned about is that I was so sure. And it's because their story seemed ridiculous. And because they said that they happened upon the guy who was killing his parents, and then he let them live. And it made no sense at all. The story made no sense. And so I think the lesson for me was sometimes the truth doesn't make sense. And so I can't base my embracing of a story because it like feels right and it clicks right in my little story-loving brain. Because to this day, I mean, the fact that it doesn't make any sense that their story was true. It was the craziest story ever, but it is true. And so I think we have to accept the fact that sometimes the true story is wacko.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it doesn't seem, because somebody didn't write it, it actually happened. And so it might not be neat and...
Our brain, like Sarah said, our brains
sensible.
are wired to create stories.
Yes.
And usually, on the whole, that's a very good thing, but it can lead us astray.
It totally, yes, it did. Yeah.
How about you, Sarah? Is this giving you pause in like either the stories you write or stories you consume in like the true crime arena, anything like that?
Yeah, what I wrote today goes right in with what Mandy was saying. When we're talking in a real world context, like outside of fiction, we have a tendency to take as truth the first narrative we hear that makes sense to us, because that's what we want. That makes our brains happy, is a story that makes sense. And it's harder to accept a version of events that's illogical or incomplete or totally ridiculous or depends so much on coincidence or whatever.
Right.
We want resolution, and that just doesn't always happen. And I think that's really important to be aware of, both as consumers of stories and as creators of stories.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast where they're talking, it was specifically in the arena of like political tribalism, like political partisanship, but you can apply this more broadly. It's like if you're a political partisan and you hear news that is implausible but helps your side, the lens you view it through is, can I believe it? It's like, is there any way I can justify believing it? Whereas if you receive news that is damaging to your side, the filter is, must I believe it? Is there some other expert I can talk to, some other way around it where you can filter it out? Again, you have your narrative of your view of the world. Again, in this example, certain political parties' agenda, but it can be just more general, your religious views, philosophical views, views of whatever. When you get news that is helpful, you just filter it. You want to put it into your story. When it's hurtful, it's like, ooh, is there a way I can keep it from the story? And usually you can, because we humans are good at doing that.
Our brains are plastic.
Yeah. So let's sort of go, sort of have a cluster of questions to close us out on. And how do you think this should affect the way we, as human beings, especially as human beings who listen to this podcast, who are interested on stories and how they work, how we consume true crime, how we consume documentaries, the news, anything like that? Is there anything we can take from this so we can be less easily led astray in the future? Mandy, any thoughts on that?
I think it comes down to humility. I kind of go back to the cops being so invested in this story they decided on. And I think I do that. It's easy to point that out in other people. But I think we have to be humble, and we have to remember the fallibility of our own memories, and the fact that inexplicable things happen in the world. And so we kind of have to hold things more loosely and just sort of view the world through a more, things don't have to make perfect sense. And if we would be more mindful of the bigger story that is a mystery anyway, and then maybe we'd be a little more free in allowing ourselves to sit with mystery and in smaller things too.
I like that. I think that is an undervalued aspect of just living as Christians. Like, we can understand there's certain things about God that he's, revealed to us.
Right.
But there's a lot he hasn't. So instead
there is a veil.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the veil was torn. But
instead
anyway.
of trying to come up with an answer for everything, let's sit with some mystery here. That's good for us.
And, oh my gosh, nothing is binary. Can we stop?
Yeah.
So everyone we disagree with is not therefore stupid or evil. So, and that's a lot of it too. Like you said, we tend to go, well, I need to believe in this person because they represent my side, or I need to doubt this person because they represent the other side.
Yeah, and so I'll start giving my 2 cents. I'll give Sarah the final word here. But to me, the biggest concrete takeaway is whenever you hear a compelling narrative, hold it loosely until you've had a chance to hear the other side, because it's not super hard to tell a story that's very compelling. I may have given this example before, but I remember a few years ago I saw a documentary about suggesting, did we solve the mystery of Jack the Ripper? So they assembled this case against this dude, okay? And they put together all the pieces. And I remember leaving that documentary yeah, it's conclusive. They solved it. That dude's Jack the Ripper. Then a few months later, I watch another Ripper documentary because that's what, whatever. And they put forward another dude. And the case they put together was equally compelling.
Right.
So it's maybe it's actually easy if you set out to just assemble a case or assemble a narrative to peg a narrative and make it compelling.
Right.
So I think this especially affects us all. Just use an example that's relevant for me, documentaries. True crime, but not just true crime. There's a lot of documentaries out there that get a lot of people all riled up thinking, there's these new facts have come through as shown in this documentary. It's let's hold our horses there.
Right.
Is it the facts, or is this just a very biased lens, and these are just talented filmmakers who can spin a story? Hold on. Let's hear what the other side has to say. Then let's sort of not get all riled up before we can hear it. That is the thing that it's hard to do, because there's some documentaries, I watched a documentary called Blackfish about SeaWorld mistreating its killer whales.
Oh.
I happen to love killer whales, so I was all on the warpath against SeaWorld. I need to hold that loosely until I've heard other people talk about it, even though I really want to fight for the killer whales, right? But yeah, that is just something to keep in mind. Because stories are so powerful, it's easy to get led astray by it. So hold these narratives loosely until you've had a chance to view them more dispassionately. And in the meantime, like Mandy said, sit with some mystery. It's good for you. Sarah, give you the last word.
Okay. So you asked 3 questions, and I answered each one. I'll try to draw them together in a way that kind of makes sense. I think when you talk about viewing something dispassionately, I think that's super important. It's really easy because our brains are wired that way to get swept away in the story. And
who's the good guy, who's the bad guy?
Yeah. And just be caught up in how it makes you feel and how interesting it is, and forget that what you're getting is one take presented in one manner and one context, and that it's almost certainly not the whole picture. And I thought this was really cute when I wrote it. I'm rolling my eyes at myself a little now. I said, mindless consumption is for Seinfeld reruns, not the news, and not true crime. I thought I was super clever when I wrote that.
I like that.
But what it comes down to for me, with stories from real life and true crime specifically, is that it is very easy to forget that there's a distinction between crime fiction and true crime that is more than just dividing what's about facts and what's not, and that we shouldn't be consuming true crime the way we consume crime fiction.
Yeah, don't posit alternate suspects.
Because everybody involved in a true crime story is a real person, and the ripple effects that go outward are so much farther than even you can think with, I mean, of course, Adnan's family and Haman Lee's family, all their friends, and like Rabia is a childhood friend, and
Yeah, like I've seen people casually
Just-
on the internet like, I think Dawn did it. It's like,
Yeah,
no.
Right.
Dawn's a real person.
Dawn's a
There's
real
no
person.
actual evidence, so let's not do this.
Right.
who has family and
Yeah,
friends
yeah.
who have probably been affected by his involvement in
Yeah.
the case, and the effects on the people who did Serial and the people who did Undisclosed, and effects on us as consumers. And it's easy to get sucked into that compelling story and forget that you're talking about real people. And this was a real 18-year-old girl who was brutally murdered, and
And Adnan would be
a
grieving that.
17-year-old whose ex-girlfriend, who by most accounts he was still friendly with,
Yes.
was not just lost her, but was, I'm pretty sure, falsely accused and imprisoned. And he's a year younger than me, so
Yeah.
that's really
Yeah.
it really brings it home what I was doing in 1999 and how much life I've lived. And it's a small life, but it's like what promise was there in this kid who was part of this super smart
Yeah.
program at school and has instead been in prison for 23 years.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and he was a good student. He was applying to colleges. Probably would have gotten in. You know, it's all.
I read something on some, I don't know, board or whatever the other day that this woman was like, well, I never really liked him. And I'm like, well, why does that matter at this point? Are you saying they should have left him in prison?
And again, it's
Very
like
strange.
viewing him as like a character.
He's
in
not a character.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
he's not a character. He's
Yeah.
a real person.
Yeah.
So,
All right. Well, fantastic. Well, thank you both for joining me.
thank you.
Thank you.
you.
We will be trading notes on different podcasts and books to read very soon. I have no doubt. But in the meantime, things are winding down at the Anselm Digital Pub. The fire's down to embers. The customers are trundling home. And you've polished off your final glass. Once again, Believe to See is a podcast of the Anselm Society Arts Guild. To find out more about the Anselm Society, please visit us at anselmsociety.org. And while you're at it, please rate and review the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.